Should individuals who have served their time be denied a voice in democracy, or does restoring their voting rights strengthen our societal fabric? Is the disenfranchisement of felons a necessary measure for public safety, or does it perpetuate racial disparities and undermine the principles of equal protection? Can we truly call ourselves a democracy if we exclude millions from the electoral process, or are there valid reasons to limit voting rights for those with felony convictions?
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today we're looking at felon voting rights. Specifically here in the U.S., we've got kind of a mix of sources for this one. Websites, legal analyses, even a Vice CE news segment with some personal stories that are really powerful. Get this, in some states, felons can actually vote from prison, while in other states, they're banned from voting for life.
It's wild, isn't it? You'd think something like voting, something that's so fundamental to our democracy, would be more clear-cut. But in reality, it's a patchwork of laws that vary so much across the country. And I think our goal today is to help you navigate this really complex landscape of felon voting rights, understand all the arguments for and against these different approaches, and see how this impacts individuals in elections.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack this idea of a patchwork of laws. I mean, our sources show some pretty shocking differences from state to state.
Yeah, the Campaign Legal Center even has this tool. That breaks it down state by state. And, it gets incredibly specific, sometimes down to the exact crimes committed.
Wow, so someone could literally need a lawyer just to figure out if they can vote or not.
It's a real problem. It creates a lot of confusion, especially for individuals who are trying to reintegrate back into society and exercise their rights. For example, Vermont and Maine. They allow voting from prison, no questions asked. But then you have a state like Iowa, where it's essentially a lifetime ban unless you go through this incredibly complicated process to get your rights restored, which can also be really expensive.
That just seems so unfair, like having such different rules depending on where you happen to live.
Exactly. And it raises some serious concerns about fairness and equality in our democracy. I mean, when you have these inconsistent laws like this, it can silence entire communities.
Especially when you consider the disproportionate incarceration rates in communities of color, right?
Absolutely. It's like a double whammy.
Yeah.
You have these higher incarceration rates in these communities, and then you add on these voting restrictions. And it creates a situation where a huge segment of the population is excluded from participating in their own governance.
So are you suggesting that, entire elections could be flipped because of these restrictions?
It's definitely possible. And I think that's why understanding the historical context here is so crucial. To really grasp the weight of this issue, we need to understand how we got to this point.
Okay, so let's step back in time for a minute. How did we end up with this system where people who have served their time are still denied this fundamental right?
Well, the right to vote in America has a really interesting evolution. Initially, it was pretty much just a privilege for the elite, largely tied to land ownership.
So if you didn't own property, you didn't get a say.
Right. And over time, of course, it expanded. But restrictions for felons have been a recurring theme throughout our history. It's almost like this constant push and pull, expanding the right to vote, while simultaneously maintaining this category of people who are deemed unfit to participate, even after they've served their time.
So knowing how we got here, let's explore why some people believe those rights should be restored.
One of the core arguments is that it promotes rehabilitation, and it helps individuals reintegrate back into society. If someone feels like they have a stake in the system, they're more likely to want to contribute to it and not disrupt it.
It makes sense. You invest in the system, you're less likely to want to mess it up. And we see a really powerful example of this in our VCE video. There's a guy named Jeff who really found his motivation to vote after his child was born. He wanted to have a voice in the decisions that would impact his family and his community.
Jeff's story is incredibly compelling because he talks about how voting gave him a sense of purpose, this feeling that he could actually make a difference. He went from feeling like an outcast to feeling like a participant. And importantly, this idea ties directly into reducing recidivism. If someone feels like a valued member of society, they're less likely to reoffend.
So it's not just about fairness, it's about public safety, too.
Exactly. But of course, there's another side to this story. There are strong arguments against restoring voting rights to felons as well.
Let's hear them. Why do some people believe that felons shouldn't be allowed to vote?
The main argument is that if you break the law, you kind of forfeit your right to participate in governance. It boils down to this fundamental debate about whether voting is an inherent right or a privilege that can be revoked.
It's interesting because even within the VCE video, we see both sides of this coin. We have Jeff, who is so motivated to vote and participate, but then we also have Florida Senator Dennis Baxley, who expresses concern about the potential for mischief in elections if felon voting rights are expanded too broadly.
Right, and that concern about potential misuse of the vote really highlights the tension between ensuring fairness for individuals while also safeguarding the integrity of our elections. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, and it becomes even more pronounced when we consider the potential for these voting restrictions to actually impact election outcomes.
Which brings us to a truly pivotal case. The Florida 2000 election, talk about a nail-biter, it came down to a handful of votes, and it's estimated that up to 100,000 felons, primarily African Americans, were barred from voting.
This case really threw a spotlight on the issue of disenfranchisement and its potential to actually skew election results.
Wait, so you're saying that thousands of people were denied their right to vote? And that could have actually changed the outcome of the presidential election?
Absolutely. It sparked all these accusations of voter suppression, and it left all these lingering doubts about the legitimacy of the outcome. And the truly chilling part is that this isn't just ancient history. The possibility of similar scenarios playing out in other states is very real.
That's scary. It makes you think about how many elections have been tipped one way or another. Because of these voting restrictions, it feels like we're only scratching the surface here. There's so much more to uncover about this issue.
There is. For example, one aspect that often gets overlooked is the role of money in all of this, which was at the heart of a fascinating case in North Carolina.
Okay, let's talk about North Carolina. What happened there? So North Carolina money, what's the connection?
Well, in North Carolina, they had this requirement that felons had to pay off.
Yeah.
All of their legal financial obligations, fines, fees, restitution, all of it, before their voting rights could be restored.
Okay, so essentially you had to be debt-free to vote.
Right, and this is where things get really interesting. The argument against this requirement is that it creates this wealth-based barrier to voting, disproportionately impacting people who are already struggling financially, often because of their criminal record.
It's like punishing someone twice for the same crime. First you serve your time, then you try to reintegrate into society, but you're hit with these financial burdens that prevent you from fully participating in the democratic process.
Exactly, and it becomes this vicious cycle. You know, you need to pay off these debts to regain your right to vote.
Yeah.
But if you're stuck in poverty,
Yeah.
because of your criminal record, it's almost impossible to do so.
So it's like back in the day when you needed to own land to vote. This financial requirement is basically a modern-day version of that same restriction.
That's a great analogy. It really highlights the concern that these financial requirements are essentially a form of a modern-day poll tax.
Wow, that's a heavy comparison. So where does the North Carolina case stand now?
Well, he went all the way to the Supreme Court, which is fascinating because it challenges the very definition of what constitutes a property qualification when it comes to voting. This case really digs into some tricky constitutional questions.
So in a nutshell, what were the arguments on both sides?
So the people challenging the law argue that requiring the payment of all these debts creates a wealth-based barrier to voting and effectively disenfranchises people based on their economic status.
Which seems pretty unfair.
Right, they view it as a form of double punishment. But the other side argues that requiring completion of one sentence, including the financial aspects, is a legitimate way to ensure accountability and responsibility. They see it as an essential part of rehabilitation and restoring one's full rights and privileges as a citizen.
So it's a classic clash of values and legal interpretations. It makes you think, what does it really mean to have paid your debt to society? And should financial solvency be a prerequisite for civic participation?
Tough questions. And the Supreme Court's decision could have major implications for how we approach felon voting rights all over the country. It's a reminder that these issues are constantly evolving, and the legal landscape is always shifting.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. I feel like before this, I just kind of assumed that once you had a felony conviction, you lost your right to vote forever. But clearly, that's not the case.
It's a common misconception, and it highlights the need for resources, like the Restore Your Vote website from the Campaign Legal Center. They break down the specifics of each state's laws and provide a clear roadmap for people to figure out if they are eligible to vote or not.
It's a fantastic resource, especially for those who may have been wrongly told they can't vote or are just unsure about their rights.
Absolutely. It's all about empowering people to understand and advocate for themselves.
And when you consider how many people are impacted by these laws, the potential for increased voter participation is huge.
Millions of Americans with past convictions could potentially be eligible to vote, but might not even know it. Imagine the impact if even a fraction of those individuals were to register and cast their ballots.
It could be a game changer, particularly in close elections, but it also highlights the responsibility we all have to understand these issues and help spread accurate information.
And that's exactly why deep dives like this are so important. We need to cut through the noise, explain these complex legal issues in plain language, and empower people to exercise their rights.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as a conversation can actually have a ripple effect and lead to greater civic engagement, a stronger sense of community, and a more representative democracy.
It's true. Small actions can lead to big changes, and while there's been progress in restoring voting rights for felons, the fight is far from over.
So what's happening now? What are some of the current battles being fought?
There are ongoing legal challenges, legislative battles, advocacy efforts, taking place all over the country. Organizations like the Campaign Legal Center are working tirelessly to push for reform and to ensure that the voices of disenfranchised individuals are heard. And then there are groups like the ones featured in the Vice video, People on the Ground, working to educate and empower people in their communities.
It's inspiring to see so many people dedicated to fighting for what they believe in. It makes you realize that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes real people working hard day after day to make a difference.
Exactly, and that's what we hope to inspire in you, our listener. We've laid out the facts, explored the arguments, and given you a glimpse into the history of this complex issue. But now it's time to turn the lens inward.
Okay, so let's talk about you, the listener. Where do you fit into all of this? What are your thoughts now that you've heard all sides of the story?
Take a moment to reflect. Is the current system in your state fair? How does it align with your personal values and your beliefs about the purpose of punishment and the meaning of citizenship?
It's a lot to considerate. And remember, it's not just about presidential elections. We're talking about local elections, school board races, city council decisions, the very fabric of your community.
Those local elections where every vote truly makes a difference. That's where the impact of felon disenfranchisement can be felt most acutely. So here's our challenge to you. Take some time to investigate your own state's laws. See how they stack up against everything we've discussed today.
Think about the potential consequences of those laws, not just for individuals, but for the very essence of democracy in your community. Maybe you'll be surprised by what you find.
You might even be inspired to get involved in atrocity, advocate for change, or make your voice heard in other ways. After all, this deep dive is really just the beginning. It's about sparking your curiosity and encouraging you to continue exploring these important questions.
We've given you the tools and information to form your own opinions. And now it's up to you to decide what you believe and how you want to participate.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, being an active and informed citizen. It's about engaging in the process, making informed decisions, and working together to create a more just and equitable society.
And on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. But don't worry, we'll be back soon with a brand new topic to explore. Until then, keep those brains buzzing and stay curious. It's a lot to consider, right?
Yeah.
And remember, it's not just about presidential elections. We're talking about local elections, school board races, city council decisions, like the very fabric of your community.
These local elections where every vote truly makes a difference. That's where the impact of felon disenfranchisement can be felt most acutely. So here's our challenge to you. Take some time. Investigate your own state's laws. See how they stack up against everything we've discussed today.
Yeah. Think about the potential consequences of those laws, not just for individuals, but for the very essence of democracy in your community. Maybe you'll be surprised by what you find.
You might even be inspired to get involved, advocate for change, or make your voice heard in other ways. After all, this deep dive is really just the beginning. It's about sparking your curiosity, encouraging you to continue exploring these important questions.
Absolutely. We've given you the tools and information to form your own opinions. Now it's up to you to decide what you believe and how you want to participate.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, being an active and informed citizen. It's about engaging in the process, making informed decisions, and working together to create a more just and equitable society.
Well said. And on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. But don't worry, we'll be back soon with a brand new topic to explore. Until then, keep those brains buzzing.
And stay curious.
folks, we make a change. We swamp in halls of power where nails are unhanged. Our felon involving so long denied, yet redemption whispers from inside. Oh, the weights we carry, decisions and needs, they shape our future, plant the seed.